What if global inflation didn't just rise, but exploded at 200%, breaking every economy at the same time? For decades, inflation was treated as a controllable force, something central banks could fine-tune with interest rates, liquidity tools, and carefully crafted narratives. But beneath the surface of the global economy, pressure has been building: record levels of debt, endless money creation, fragmented geopolitics, fragile supply chains, and now, AI accelerating production in some sectors while destabilizing labor and pricing in others. What once looked like temporary shocks are starting to feel permanent. In today's world, inflation is no longer just an economic statistic. It's a signal, a warning that the systems designed to measure value, store wealth, and coordinate trust may be reaching their limits. Prices move faster than wages. Savings lose meaning. Long-term planning becomes guesswork. And across nations, the same question begins to surface. Quietly at first, then all at once. Are we losing control of money itself? This is not a story about a single country or a localized financial crisis. This is a global economy with a scenario where inflation becomes synchronized, structural, and unstoppable, where currencies no longer fail one by one, but together, where megacorporations gain influence as governments struggle to respond, where AI reshapes markets faster than institutions can regulate them, and where an alternate economy begins to emerge in the cracks of a collapsing system. Stay with me until the end of the simulation. What you're about to discover may change how you see future predictions, monetary stability, and the true cost of economic control. Because this scenario isn't built on fantasy. It's built on trends already in motion. And perhaps it's closer to reality than it seems. We're about to step into a timeline where inflation stops being a phase and becomes a defining force of civilization. And it's exactly here that this alternate timeline begins to take shape. Before we move deeper into this alternate economy, pause for a moment inside the simulation. If this scenario already feels plausible, or if one detail has caught your attention, share in a short comment. These signals help shape which future predictions deserve to be explored next, and they show that serious discussions about the global economy still matter. If this analysis resonates, a simple like helps this kind of long-form, documentary-style thinking reach others who are also questioning where the world economy is heading. And if you want to follow more global economy, what are scenarios, alternate timelines where inflation, AI, megacorporations, and monetary systems collide, consider subscribing. This isn't about trends or noise, but about building a space for people who want to understand possible futures before they arrive. Now, with that said, let's continue the simulation. Because once inflation crosses a certain threshold, it stops behaving like an economic problem and starts acting like a force of nature. In the earliest years of this timeline, the change isn't announced with collapse or a single dramatic event. It begins quietly, inside prices, paychecks, and daily routines, where the foundations of stability start to slip one transaction at a time. In the first years of this timeline, the shift is subtle enough to be misunderstood. Prices don't explode overnight. They accelerate. What used to change monthly now changes weekly. What used to change weekly begins to change daily. Wages lag behind reality, turning paychecks into outdated references almost as soon as they are deposited. Savings, once a symbol of security, quietly evaporate as purchasing power dissolves in real time. The global economy keeps moving, but the signals it relies on, prices, contracts, forecasts, start to lose coherence. Within 2 to 3 years, inflation stops behaving like an economic metric and starts acting like an environmental condition. Long-term contracts collapse because no one can agree on future value. Mortgages, pensions, insurance models, all built on stability, fracture under constant repricing. Markets don't crash in a single moment. They become unreliable. Investors are no longer pricing assets, but guessing which form of value might survive the next cycle. For ordinary people, daily decisions turn strategic. When to buy, what to hold, what to let go of. Survival becomes a financial journey measured in weeks, not decades. As pressure mounts, governments and central banks are forced into reaction rather than control. Interest rates rise, then lose relevance. Emergency price caps appear, followed by capital controls and currency restrictions. Digital monitoring expands under the justification of stability. At the same time, megacorporations step into the vacuum. With global supply chains, data dominance, and AI-optimized logistics, they become the only entities capable of delivering consistency in an inconsistent world. Private payment systems, corporate-backed credits, and closed economic ecosystems begin to replace national currencies in practice, if not in law. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario. As years pass, the world no longer shares a single inflation reality. New economic blocks form, not around ideology, but around control of energy, food, computation, and automation. Some regions anchor value to resources, others to AI productivity and algorithmic coordination. The old monetary order fades, replaced by fragmented systems that cannot fully communicate with each other. Power shifts away from states toward networks capable of managing scarcity at scale. From here, two extreme outcomes begin to crystallize. In one path, hyperinflation forces radical transformation. Automation breaks cost structures, access replaces ownership, and an abundant economy slowly emerges where basic needs are decoupled from money. In the other, inflation becomes permanent leverage. Wealth concentrates behind platforms, access is conditional, and economic mobility freezes. The same technology that could liberate instead enforces hierarchy. Both futures exist simultaneously, separated not by borders, but by permissions. When this new order stabilizes, the deepest impact is no longer financial. It's psychological. Work loses its traditional meaning. Identity detaches from income. Trust, time, and adaptability define survival. A collective mentality forms, shaped by constant decision-making, hidden trade-offs, and quiet revelations about what value truly is. Behind the scenes of this future, society is still searching for something stable to believe in. If this part of the journey resonates with you, write in the comments. That makes sense to me. As the timeline moves into years 3 through 7, the illusion of temporary instability disappears. Inflation has already rewritten daily behavior, but now it begins to rewrite authority itself. Governments respond first, not with confidence, but with urgency. Price controls appear across food, energy, housing, and transportation. Capital movements are restricted to slow the outflow of value. Digital rationing systems are introduced under the language of protection, fairness, and continuity. Every decision is framed as necessary to prevent social collapse. But something fundamental breaks during this phase: credibility. Central banks, once seen as the guardians of monetary stability, lose their symbolic power. Interest rates no longer anchor expectations. Forward guidance becomes noise. In a world where prices reset faster than policy can react, institutional authority erodes quietly. Trust doesn't vanish all at once. It migrates, and it migrates toward scale. Megacorporations, already embedded in global supply chains, step into the gap between policy and reality. With AI-driven logistics, predictive demand models, and control over data flows, they succeed where states struggle. They stabilize prices inside their ecosystems. They offer private payment systems, internal credits, subscription-based access to essentials. Over time, these platforms begin to function as parallel economies, more predictable, more efficient, and increasingly unavoidable. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario. As the years stretch forward, the global economy stops behaving like a single system. It fragments, not into chaos, but into structured divergence. New blocks of power emerge based on what each region can anchor value to. Energy-rich zones stabilize through resource backing. AI-dense regions price value through computation and productivity. Others fall into perpetual volatility, excluded from both. This isn't a cold war of ideology. It's a quiet competition over who controls scarcity. Along this journey, two extreme outcomes become visible. In one path, the pressure of hyperinflation forces transformation. Automation collapses production costs, access replaces ownership, and a form of abundance economy emerges, where basic needs are guaranteed but traditional wealth loses meaning. In the opposite path, inflation is never solved, only managed. Access becomes conditional. Platforms consolidate control. A concentration economy forms, where stability exists, but only for those inside controlled systems. When this new order begins to stabilize, the deepest impact is no longer economic. It's human. Routine becomes fluid. Careers dissolve into adaptive roles. Decisions feel heavier because every choice carries long-term uncertainty. Identity detaches from income and reattaches to usefulness, adaptability, and network relevance. A collective mentality takes shape, one shaped by constant recalibration, quiet compromises, and hidden trade-offs. Behind the scenes of this future, people are no longer asking how to get rich, but how to remain anchored. And beneath all of it, a deeper truth starts to surface about value, control, and what societies are willing to trade for stability. If this resonates with you, write in the comments. I'm on this journey too. As this alternate timeline moves beyond the 7th year, the global economy no longer pretends to be unified. What once felt like temporary divergence hardens into structure. Inflation doesn't recede. It reorganizes the world around it. Nations don't collapse simultaneously, but they drift into different realities. The idea of a single monetary order quietly dissolves. Some regions adapt by anchoring value to what cannot be printed. Resource-backed economies emerge, stabilizing themselves through energy, food, and raw materials. Value is measured in extraction capacity, logistics control, and physical throughput. Inflation still exists, but it's contained by tangible limits. In parallel, AI-optimized production zones take shape. Here, value is no longer tied to currency at all, but fired to real-time productivity, computation, and energy efficiency. Algorithms calculate work continuously, adjusting prices, wages, and access based on output rather than promises. Meanwhile, cash-based states fall behind. Without resources, automation, or digital coordination, inflation accelerates unchecked. Currencies fragment. Informal markets dominate. Trust erodes. These regions don't vanish from the map, but they exit relevance. In the background, a new truth becomes visible. Geopolitics is no longer about borders, armies, or ideology. It's about who controls scarcity through systems. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario. Along this decade-long journey, experimental monetary frameworks begin to replace traditional money. AI-driven valuation systems emerge, using energy flows, supply stability, and productive contribution as units of account. Value becomes dynamic, contextual, and constantly recalculated. For some, this feels like liberation. For others, it feels like permanent surveillance disguised as efficiency. The same system that removes inflation risk also removes anonymity. From here, the future splits again. In one extreme outcome, these systems unlock an abundance economy. Automation and coordination reduce costs to near zero. Access becomes universal, not because of generosity, but because exclusion becomes inefficient. Inflation loses its power, and society reorganizes around creativity, problem-solving, and shared infrastructure. In the opposite outcome, coordination tightens into control. Scarcity is managed but never eliminated. Platforms decide access. Stability exists, but only inside permission layers of the economy. Concentration replaces competition. When this new order stabilizes, the deepest impact unfolds slowly. People adapt their routines to systems that constantly evaluate them. Careers become fluid identities. Long-term planning shifts from wealth accumulation to access preservation. The mental journey of the society is defined by continuous adjustment, quiet compromises, and revelations about how little control individuals truly have over abstract systems. A collective mentality forms, resilient, adaptive, but always aware of invisible boundaries. Behind the scenes of this future, a question lingers unanswered, not about money, but about agency, about who decides value when value is no longer fixed. If this feels aligned with your understanding, write in the comments. This future feels uncomfortably real. As this timeline advances further, the consequences of prolonged inflation no longer feel theoretical. They solidify into lived realities. What began as instability evolves into direction, and the world starts revealing two radically different outcomes born from the same crisis. The divergence isn't announced. It unfolds quietly, through decisions made under pressure, through systems optimized for survival rather than fairness. in one trajectory. Hyperinflation becomes a catalyst for radical innovation. Faced with the impossibility of preserving old monetary structures, societies abandon the idea that money must store long-term value. Currencies are reset, simplified, or replaced entirely by access-based systems. Automation accelerates not for profit, but for cost elimination. AI-managed production drives prices toward zero in essential sectors. Food, energy, housing, and healthcare are decoupled from traditional payment mechanisms. This emerging abundance economy doesn't feel utopian. It feels efficient. Scarcity still exists, but it's engineered out of basic survival. Human effort shifts toward creativity, coordination, and problem-solving rather than wage dependency. Inflation, once destructive, becomes irrelevant. But there is another path. Now I want to go even deeper into the darker version of this future. In this timeline, inflation is never truly defeated. It's absorbed, managed, weaponized. Wealth concentrates permanently behind platforms that control access rather than ownership. Assets are no longer bought. They are licensed. Stability exists, but only inside closed economic ecosystems. Inflation continues outside these systems, eroding independence and forcing participation. What looks like order is, in reality, hierarchy. Over the years, this concentration economy reshapes behavior. Decisions become constrained by permissions. Economic mobility slows, then freezes. Automation still advances, but its gains are captured at the top. AI optimizes distribution, not for abundance, but for control. Inflation becomes a filtering mechanism, separating those inside protected systems from those exposed to constant erosion. The truth hidden behind this future is unsettling. Stability is no longer a right, but a product. When this new order stabilizes, the deepest impact is psychological. Identity shifts. People stop defining themselves by what they own and start defining themselves by what they can access. Routine adapts to subscription-based existence. Long-term purpose fragments into short-term optimization. The collective mentality becomes cautious, adaptive, and quietly exhausted. Trust narrows. Aspirations shrink. Yet beneath the surface, awareness grows. Across both futures, one transformation is unavoidable. Humanity is forced to confront a question it has avoided for generations. If money can no longer be trusted, what truly defines value? Behind the scenes of this alternate economy, the answer is still forming, shaped by choices made under pressure, by systems designed in haste, and by a society learning slowly what it is willing to trade for certainty. If this part of the journey resonates with you, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." As this alternate timeline continues to unfold, the most profound transformation is no longer found in markets, currencies, or systems of trade. It emerges quietly inside people. When inflation becomes permanent, money loses its role as a reliable measure of effort, time, and future security. Work, once anchored to wages and long-term progression, begins to lose its meaning. Jobs no longer promise stability. Careers no longer define identity. What remains is adaptation. In the early years of this shift, people try to preserve familiar routines. They work harder, negotiate faster, move more often. But as the decade advances, a realization settles in. Income alone no longer protects against erosion. Value migrates away from paychecks and toward access. Access to systems, to networks, to platforms that can still provide consistency in an unstable world. Skills matter, but only when they remain relevant. Connections matter, but only when trust still exists. The journey becomes less about growth and more about positioning. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario. As this new order stabilizes, society begins to reorganize its sense of purpose. Time becomes the most precious asset. Not money, time with predictability. Trust narrows into smaller circles. Long-term plans shrink into flexible horizons. People measure success not by accumulation, but by continuity. Can they maintain access? Can they remain adaptable? Can they avoid falling outside the systems that still function? The impact on identity is subtle but relentless. Without stable money, status symbols change. Ownership fades. Experience replaces possession. Routine becomes modular, adjustable, always provisional. Education shifts from credentials to constant retraining. Relationships adapt to economic uncertainty, reshaping family structures, migration patterns, and cultural expectations. A collective mentality forms, resilient, alert, quietly exhausted. People learn to read signals, to anticipate shifts, to live inside permanent recalibration. Behind the scenes of this future, a truth becomes impossible to ignore. Inflation didn't just destabilize economies. It exposed how deeply human identity was tied to abstractions that could disappear. When prices never stop moving, stability becomes psychological rather than financial. Meaning becomes something constructed, not inherited. And society, stripped of old certainties, begins searching for new anchors, ethical, communal, even philosophical. This is where the simulation grows quieter, but heavier, because beneath the noise of systems and markets lies a deeper question about civilization itself. Not how economies recover, but what kind of humans emerge when uncertainty becomes a default condition. If this reflection resonates with you, write in the comments, "I'm still thinking about this." As the simulation reaches its current horizon, one reality becomes unavoidable. A world shaped by 200% inflation doesn't simply experience economic damage. It undergoes a redefinition of value itself. What was once measured, stored, and exchanged in money is now fragmented across access, time, trust, and control. The early shocks may have looked like crises. The later adaptations may have looked like solutions. But together, they reveal something deeper unfolding beneath the surface. In the first years, inflation felt like an enemy to defeat. Governments fought it. Markets tried to outrun it. Individuals adjusted their behavior to survive it. But over time, inflation stopped being the problem and became the environment. Policies adapted. Systems hardened. A new normal emerged, not stable, but predictable in its instability. Along the decade-long journey, society learned how to function without the assumption that money would protect the future. Now I want to go even deeper into what this truly means. When inflation becomes permanent, the question is no longer how currencies recover. It's how coordination survives, how trust is rebuilt when value constantly shifts, how collective decisions are made when no shared unit of measure exists. Behind the scenes of this future, the old economic language loses precision. Growth, savings, productivity. These words still exist, but they no longer anchor reality the way they once did. In some regions, systems evolved toward abundance through automation and coordination. In others, stability is enforced through access control and hierarchy. Both outcomes coexist, not as good versus evil, but as responses to the same pressure. And across all of them, society undergoes a quiet transformation. People learn to live with uncertainty not as an exception, but as a baseline. Purpose becomes adaptive. Identity becomes fluid. Meaning is no longer inherited from systems. It is constructed through choices. The truth hidden within this alternate timeline is unsettling but clarifying. Inflation did not destroy value. It exposed how fragile our definitions of value always were. When prices never stop moving, the real currency becomes stability of access, reliability of systems, and alignment of incentives. The economy doesn't disappear. It mutates. And with it, so does civilization's understanding of progress. This is where the simulation pauses. Not because the story ends, but because a larger question now hangs in the air. If inflation is permanent, if money is no longer neutral, and if systems, not states, define reality, then what kind of economic order emerges next? And more importantly, who gets to shape it? Write in the comments. That question stays with me. If you've stayed until this point, it tells me something important. It means these questions matter to you too. This channel exists for exactly that reason. To explore what-if economy scenarios, alternate futures, and deep simulations about where the global economy might be heading when today's assumptions no longer hold. If this timeline made you pause, reflect, or see value and uncertainty a little differently, consider subscribing, not for alerts or noise, but to stay connected to the space where future predictions are examined with patience, logic, and depth. A place to think before the future arrives. You can also leave a short comment to mark that you reached the end. Right? This future really made me think. It helps shape which alternate economies deserve to be simulated next, and it shows that these conversations resonate beyond the surface. And if this journey felt meaningful, a simple like helps this kind of long-form, reflective content reach others who are searching for clarity in uncertain times. There's another simulation waiting right here, one that connects directly to everything we've just explored. Click it, and let's keep going together into the next possible future. Which alternate economic future should I explore next?